That movie sucked.
I kind of liked it.
Movie Night Crew Network.
Hello and welcome to Content and Capable, where I try to figure out what it really means to adult. This week I learnt all about witchcraft from Fawna of the Cat's Tea and Witchcraft podcast. We discussed a whole variety of things, including how she got into witchcraft and what it looks like today. Welcome to Content and Capable. It's lovely to have you, Fawna.
Thank you so much.
I suppose we better get right into it. I was just saying before we started recording, I've never been around or involved with witchcraft. So what does witchcraft entail?
It depends on who you talk to sometimes. The term witchcraft, let me define what people now see modern witchcraft as. Modern witchcraft is not a religion in itself, which initially confuses a lot of people. They're like, oh, is it a religion? No. Witchcraft is a craft that can be added onto any form of spirituality or religion of people's choosing. But what we perceive as witchcraft is more of European-based magical systems or spiritualism, because around the world, there are different forms of magic in different cultures. They have different perceptions in what they do and don't like, if they work with different deities or one or multiple. So it all depends. But just what witchcraft is generally a practitioner, or if they call themselves a witch, using energies around them, their own energies, or working either with elements, gods and deities, whatever you like to call them, and trying to spark some sort of change.
Yeah.
So in the easiest way to really, really downplay it is it's essentially a prayer with like a lot of extra steps and tools. That's like the simplest thing I can explain to people. And that's how I explained it to my mother. Like, she knew what was going on, but she never really asked until recently. And that was the easiest way for me to explain. Because if it's like, oh, you see different types of Christianity, or if you want to just focus on Catholicism, they use a lot of things that modern witches use. And some of it is either taken from them or just older traditions that the Catholic Church used from older cultures, because we know how things go over time. Different cultures and religions influence each other, and then eventually one of them becomes more dominant, and then it's fully associated with them. So over time, the same thing with witchcraft. In any religion, we all kind of pull from each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were having this conversation because it's the month of October, so we've been talking about Halloween a lot. And we're having this conversation in the Movie Night Crew Network Discord about how Catholicism in general just seems to steal these pagan holidays. And you make a really interesting point about they all kind of like borrow from each other until we get to this point where it's all very similar.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so for you, what does your witchcraft look like?
My witchcraft does have a religion attached to it. I am Wiccan in particular, and I'm going to dive a little bit into the difference between Wicca and witchcraft itself. Wicca is a religion that uses witchcraft. But witchcraft itself is not a religion. Some people like to claim it is. There's like, oh, well, by definition. Yeah, by definition it might be. But witchcraft is so broad. It's not like just saying, oh, it's Christianity, but there's different types of Christianity. Like, witchcraft is too, like, generic of a term to actually be considered. There is no established organization to be considered witchcraft, and it's not recognized as a religion, unlike what Wicca is, a recognized religion by the United States and I think some other countries, at least since the 70s, but witchcraft itself is not. So, but mine focuses towards Wicca, and it was originated, or at least fully became public in the 1950s by Gerald Gardner in the 50s. And he was influenced by Thelema and Aleister Crowley in a bunch of different orders and different forms of spiritualism. So a lot of that is based on Gerald Gardner. But we have our own kind of rituals, and some of the things are very similar to what people will associate with Catholicism. There's altars and the use of incense and just having like your routine. So it's really not a scary thing. It's not exactly the same, but like kind of those things people see in Catholic churches pretty similar if you just want to have something to like picture.
Yeah, I think when people talk about like organized religion, they think it's something special, and then it turns out, it's it happens in a lot of other places, which I think is very interesting. We end up, I think there's this commentary I've heard when I do a lot of cultural studies at university for my degree. There's this commentary I have where a lot of the time, because we are always in constant contact with each other, we end up kind of at the same point from different perspectives.
Yeah,
which is I don't know, I think it's pretty amazing.
it is really amazing. Yeah. And with that conversation, that's actually something that causes some weird discourse in the witchcraft community, because just in our world itself, there's a very big thing when it comes to culture. What is cultural appropriation? How do you distinguish this when it comes to religion or other forms of cultural sharing? Some have been in positive ways, some have been forced, and we know that, and some have been stolen without recognition, which we are all actively trying to correct. But witchcraft and religion is no different, because we grow and share by sharing information and teaching each other. But we are now more focused on doing it respectfully, though, which is very different, I would say, when in the 1950s, when Wicca was established. Things were just very different. Yeah,
and so I suppose, when we hear about witchcraft and witches, I don't know, the first thing that came to my head, my naive little brain, was things like the Salem witch trials and, that fear and hatred.
Yeah.
Is that still something that is prevalent today?
Depends on where you live. I would say in places like Salem now, because it is such a prominent part of its history, not as big of a deal. The culture and the politics in the North, or in part at least of the United States, are very different if you would say to the Midwest or the South. So more the coasts, with the way things are, seem to be a little easier to navigate with these alternative, what people consider alternative, ways of life or religions. And then there are some dangerous spots across the country that you are protected legally, but it doesn't mean people aren't going to be assholes to you. So so there are some issues with that still, depending on the community that you're in. So people got to make that judgment depending on where they're living, if it's family they got to worry about, or if it's their neighbors and what sort of backlash they might get. Because some people don't care if they harass you.
Yeah, and, adding on to that is that, when you participate or, are a witch yourself, is it really obvious that you are a witch as compared to, like, a normal member of society?
Me specifically, or other people?
Or you specifically and other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some people very openly are open about their craft and will dress the part. But the only reason we associate witches with certain things is a lot of the time it's because of old depictions, movies, old books. That was a forced visualization that we're now just kind of rolling with. Some days definitely look witchy and people would probably assume it. But like if I'm at work on an average day, I dress like a librarian, but underneath everything is facial piercings under the mask, tattoos. This weekend I had children staring at me because I have a very masculine haircut, but I had like crazy red eyeshadow on and like black lipstick, and it was like matching my outfit. But like some days more than other, and it depends on how I feel. And some people will do that every day and almost want to openly be seen as a witch. And other people are like, it's my personal thing, depends on how I feel. I don't need everyone to know, but if you know, you know.
Yeah, I suppose it's kind of like religion, you can, dress the part, or, if some religions, look that way, or you could, not, and, it depends on how many questions you want to field in a day.
Exactly.
And, what does your, like, as, I think we've established you are a witch, in terms of, the practices that you you do normally, are there some things that you do that are like particularly witch practices that you do quite regularly?
Yeah. So I'm trying to like organize my thoughts and how to like have it properly make sense. So I'll kind of start in what I would do in my normal day. I don't do like spells on a daily basis. Like that's just absolutely absurd. But a big part of at least my practice and with the podcast that I have and other practitioners is a lot of research. If it's either watching videos, listening to podcasts, reading books, or if you're just going to the library or purchasing used books or buying new books, having some sort of background where you're always learning something new, because there's always something new to learn, or you can always change your opinions on it. So a lot of my days consist of a lot of reading and just learning or listening to other things, especially because I got my podcast too. I have to continuously update and learn new things and force myself to do a little bit more than I would before. But that's usually towards like the midday and the evening when I do those things in between work, when I have downtime, and just when I feel like reading. But just the little things also kind of add up as well. So in the mornings when I take my shower, I'll get ready, I will visualize a light around me. And this is something that's a combination of what we call grounding, shielding, and centering. It's the idea of focusing on you, visualizing negative things being pushed out, and also visualizing good things coming towards you as well. It's kind of like a mind game you play with yourself, and also trying to balance your personal energy field, because we know how we feel if people do see auras or not. I don't see them. I have more of a feeling sense, so I kind of know how I'm going to feel pretty quickly through the day, so I can kind of prepare myself pretty decently, unless something just really throws me off throughout the day. So stuff like that. Or if I want to dress witchy, that kind of gets me going. Usually on a day, if we have our holidays or we have our espits, which are rituals we do during moons, I'll probably do something with like journaling or get ready for if I want to do a spell or ritual. And if I'm generally working with doing those little things, I might light my candles on my altar to the deities that I work with and kind of pay them respect. I have like permanent offerings for them, or ones that I'll just kind of clean up every once in a while, because one of my offerings is coffee grounds, and the other one is just a bottle of mead, and I'll just dust it off every couple weeks just to make sure it's nice and clean. So things like that people don't think are witchy, but are witchy. And then if I do have a ritual, or I'm just doing some divination and pulling tarot cards, or just journaling about experiences that I've had, or if I had any dreams, if I was doing a meditation or a prayer or whatever you want to call it, it comes in different ways, and you can experience it very differently depending on what your goals, if you're doing something new or you're doing something just out of habit, like what I do when I'm in the shower. It's just a natural thing that I do, and I don't really have to think about it.
Yeah. And, I suppose it's like all kind of things, you get around. How, have you not came out, because that's not, but like, have you like explained, in the fact that you are a witch to other people, and what are some people's reactions?
For me, I'm kind of like, this is a term that's kind of, some people like, some people don't. They call it coming out of the broom closet. Some people like it because they're like, oh, that's a cute little term and stuff. But other people say it's offensive because it's projecting your experiences on the LGBTQ community that very similarly uses that term. And then some people just don't care. But I'll use that just to kind of make sense, because it is a topic that is very difficult for other people to understand. And we do get negative reactions sometimes. Thankfully, I'm very fortunate. I don't have to actually worry about that, because I do have a supportive family, even if their religious beliefs are different, and friends. And my boyfriend's family is, some of them know, but I just haven't had the conversation. But depending on how I am or what I talk about, or his sisters, when we talk about things, they know. It's not always talked about. But when it comes to like strangers or like people at work, sometimes hints are dropped, or they just kind of figure it out. And then they'll ask questions. It's generally just like, kind of like your reaction now. It's just like, I just want to understand. Just the basics. Just because it's something that is very demonized under false information that's literally been forced down people's throats for like up to 1,000+ years in different ways or forms. So my reactions I get from people are generally pretty positive.
Yeah.
But I actually do have friends, and I had a friend who actually told me last night she's having some pretty negative reactions from her extended family, and she hasn't even come out about it. She's just been buying a lot of candles and talking about the moon, and I think they just think anything that associates with astrology or candles or crystals is like the devil. And she's like, I still work with like Christian bases. Like, you literally have no idea what you're talking about. So just because I only stick to a rosary or I'm not just on my knees worshiping every weekend at church doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So I do know people that have had negative reactions. But it doesn't mean I won't in the future, though. But I kind of have these things in my head as like reactions if I ever do have an experience. Ready.
I think that, like, I don't know, it's very interesting. I've been in and around organized religion for a long time myself. And often, the assumptions come thick and fast when you tell someone that, you're associated with that religion. I think, like with witchcraft, because we have heard about it in the history books, we've got like an awareness that it exists, but we've never like really like learnt about it or like have made assumptions about it. I don't know. Some people will have a negative reaction regardless of whatever you tell them.
And it's out of ignorance.
It's totally. And then you've got the really lovely people who, want to know more, want to understand, why you've decided to become a witch or decided to get into witchcraft.
Yep.
When did you figure out that you wanted to be a witch or was going to get into witchcraft?
When I talk about this, I kind of think it's something that happened throughout my entire life, but it was recognized in different phases. When I was younger, I always felt like there was something more, but I was always told monsters aren't real. People are the monsters. So if anything's wrong, it's either something else or it's your hormones, or your teenager, things your experiences. But then the idea of, oh yeah, but Christianity is real, or Judaism, because I have family who's Christian and Jewish. And so there's that little bit of confusion. It's like, well, if this can be real, why can't this also be real? But then also the exposure of Harry Potter. It first came out when I was in early elementary school. I remember my dad handing me Sorcerer's Stone, Philosopher's Stone, whichever one it is, depending on where you're listening from, handing me the book. And then my next memory is him starting to read the book to me. And I was like 5. Yeah. And it had just recently come out. So those little memories there. And then as I get older, exposure to like ghosts was the next thing that kind of triggered into that world. And I always joked about with my sister and my parents that I felt like there were some ghosts in the house because we live in an area that was a very big part of the Civil War here in the United States. So there's always like battlefields around us. Things are buried. Like the property next to my old elementary school literally had Civil War foxholes that were protected next to the walkways that we were allowed to walk on. So there's a lot of history literally within the land. And then when you build communities over top of it, that history is still there. And some people believe like the energies can survive if it's like either a loop or the actual spirits are there, depending. And sometimes I would feel like I would see white figures walk down the hallways, but then me and my sister would swear things were living in our closets because the walls of our closets were back to back. Yeah. And she had we hear noises. So if we were like cleaning, we would hear noises and knocking in the back of it, or we would just like mess with each other and knock on the walls. But there was one night that I was in college at this point, but I was home for like a holiday or like a weekend or something. And I was been sitting on my bed for hours. And all of a sudden she texts me. She's like, what are you doing? She's like, why are you making noise in your closet? It's like 10:30 at night. And I'm like, I've been sitting on my bed for like 3 hours on the computer. And she's like, oh, fuck. Like, she was hearing noises that were coming from my room that were not existing on my end. But she was very openly hearing them. So it was more of those exposure as we got older because we were actually paying attention to it. And we were acknowledging it. And then I had things that would disappear. And I would hear things. And now that I think about it more recently, it could have been what we call the Fae. Yeah. Taking things and messing with it and stuff like that. So there's that. But then as I got older, I was exposed to Reiki, which is a form of energy healing. And then that transitioned to once I got out of college, I'd already been doing divination with like pendulums and stuff, working with crystals, working with Reiki, my exposure and love of like the supernatural and horror stories and things like that. Slowly transitioned into my spirituality in me just maturing as a young adult throughout college and experiences and people dying and going through grief and breakups and all the things that happen throughout life that shape you.
Yeah.
And so I took that step since I was out of my parents' home. I was starting my career. I was paying my own bills. And I was like, I want to know more about this. And I emailed the coven that was closest to me and is now still the coven that I am a part of. And have been working with on and off since 2015, but now I'm an official coven member. So I have been calling myself officially a witch since 2015. But like all the other things I said prior led up to it. Because sometimes you don't know. And when you don't have that information, the access I have to witchcraft materials now were not the same when the 90s, early 2000s. And even when I first got into college, like most of the big witchcraft stuff was on Tumblr. And I didn't dive into the witch Tumblr. So, because social media was still a fresh thing. We didn't even have Instagram at the end of high school. Like, it didn't exist until, like, the beginning, end of my first year of college.
Yeah.
So, it makes a real big difference with that in the social media and people's exposure to this content.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think the internet has allowed for people who might have been interested in really niche things to find a community, which is awesome. Because, you know, I'm thinking, 20 years ago when my parents were my age, that would have never had, the access to, the amazing communities that I've had access to.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
It's awesome. In terms of, like, not just, you've got a day job as well, don't you?
I do have a day job. I am a professional graphic designer.
Wow. So does that play any role into, your witchcraft?
I think it allows me just to have a different perspective when it comes to creativity and creating things. I branded all my stuff from my own podcast, but I don't promote it as my own art. Like, I'll tell people, I made this stuff, but if they approached me as Fawna, I'm not going to be making art for other witches.
Yeah.
Because definitely. I do try to keep, at least through the podcast and the larger group of the internet, I do try to still keep that privacy of my life, because there is still a stigma against witchcraft. And even though I am legally protected, there's no way it would affect my job. That would actually, if it ever affected my job, it would very easily become a lawsuit. So it was like, that's how sensitive it is within my field. And I am way okay if I'm exposed at work. But when it comes to the internet, people are just assholes. And I just don't need that harassment. And it's also to protect my family. So when it comes to like my design stuff and my work, it's more of like personal usage when it comes to the witchcraft. I'll create things for my friends. And I'll work in like some artwork, or I'll make my own decorations. I'll make my own tools in some cases. Or I will take just my creative thought process and transition it when I write spells. Yeah. Because when it comes to writing spells, it's a very thorough experience. It's not just necessarily reading a book that may or may not the spells work for you, because not all spells work for all people. Yeah. That's
interesting. So, could you explain a little bit more about spells? What are they, and how do they, play a role in your witchcraft?
So, essentially spells, like I said, in magic, is kind of like a prayer with extra steps. But the concept of what most people think of a prayer is they say something either often enough to whoever they're working with, whatever deity, spirit, blah, 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 whatever. And then they just leave it there. Sometimes they'll use maybe like a rosary to pray, or they'll count the beads on like a mala, depending on that, if they have different types of prayer beads, if it's not a rosary. But when it comes to like actual magic and spells in particular, it doesn't have to be complicated, but it doesn't also have to necessarily be simple. But the main goal is usually, if you have materials, say working with herbs and crystals. Herbs and crystals have what we call metaphysical associations. Yeah. And whatever those associations are what you take in mind when writing a spell. So if I'm writing a spell for prosperity, or let's say I want to get a promotion. In most Western culture, we assume the color green as like money, at least in the United States, because most of our money is green. So I would use green for money, but also green represents the element of earth, which represents grounding, which throughout more details I don't want to get too deep into, associates with money and success and grounding and maturity and the earth being stable. Money makes us stable. So then there's also that association with the earth and green, and it can get super, super deep, or it could be as simple as green and money. So depending on what you want to do and what sort of energy you are trying to promote and bring in. So say I'm using a color green candle. I have maybe coins and change around me to represent the money as well. And I will look into herbs that also represent very similar things or other energies like quickness. Like I need a loan really quickly. So I'm going to use cinnamon, which is good for speed. So I'll add that cinnamon into it. I'll dress the candle with olive oil or sunflower oil. I'll roll it in the cinnamon, have the change around, burn the candle, say whatever chanting. I will sing or dance or drum or sway or do something to raise energy. And the raising the energy while along doing the other things is the idea of taking your intent from all these things you threw together that might just seem like random things you clash together to someone who isn't familiar with the process. But when you plan in your mind your intention of what you're doing is where the energy builds. But those little things like people will drum or dance or sway or whatever you do, like literally people will dance around fires if they do something outside in a group or if they have a fire pit in their backyard. That energy building is used to push your intention out into the universe. And then whatever you do to complete it, that's a spell, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. You know, my experience with prayer sounds very similar to your experience with spells. Yeah. So it definitely makes sense. So, you know, when you do these things, you know, have people... I've got to phrase this really, really, like, in the correct way, so I...
That's okay.
Not get the... Yeah. Do people, like, ever, like, worry that, you know, because you are a witch, you could do something that could hurt them, or, you know, you are, like, a bit more dangerous, but then at the same time, you know, other people will turn around and go, oh, I could use this for my gain, you know, can you do these spells to help me get better?
There are people that do think that way, and I'm not easily offended, but some people are very offended about that. But I know it's out of ignorance, unless someone's being like a direct asshole to me directly and telling me I'm going to go to hell, this isn't what Jesus wanted, or blah, 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 whatever bullshit they start spewing. I'm trying to think how to phrase this correctly. Yeah, people do associate it with evil and stuff, and it's just because of that ignorance and what I would say the church has established, and then Hollywood doesn't help it. And there are people who do practice hexes, curse, and do all those things. There are many different forms of witchcraft out there, or other forms of magical practices that are not witchcraft because they come from other cultures. But other cultures and other people have different systems of morality. So you also have to take into account of what culture you're a part of and who other people are also a part of. Some people don't give a crap if maybe, say, a coworker pissed you off and there's a witch that is hex friendly and they're like, that person pissed me off, so I'm going to do a spell to cause them to, every time they bend over, their pants split.
Yeah.
Just something relatively innocent, but enough to piss them off and drive them crazy. It could be as simple as that, or there are people that actually want people's lives to just fall apart. I personally don't participate in that because in my practice of being an eclectic Wiccan, There is some debate if all Wiccans practice this, and there's a whole thing when it's about the Wiccan Rede, if it's like Gardnerian, which is the traditional British witchcraft, which Gerald Gardner established. There are things that they're like, no, as long as you're not harming yourself and others, or there's a whole discourse when it comes to that. But yeah, there are witches that do harmful things, essentially, because they don't care. But then there are ones that only do things for good, or at least for protection. Because there are things we can do that are called like banishing spells. If someone's affecting you negatively, you could try to banish them, or you can use something to freeze them out of your life, or just cut them out of your life with like what we call a cord spell. And so it could be as simple as just protection, or just bringing positive things into your life like prosperity or money, or making sure good things happen to your children and family and friends. It could go any direction, but it does depend on the person's personal beliefs and what they believe in and what culture they're a part of. But I would never encourage anyone to do anything that would break the law, though. There are things that you do draw lines when it comes to stuff like that.
Oh yeah, 100%. I've spent the last 3 days dealing with some light cyberbullying, let's say, and as much as like it's frustrating, I'm not personally being cyberbullied, but as much as it's frustrating to see this person use a position of power and abuse it, and as much as like I would love to do illegal things to hurt them, I have to understand that I can't.
We would
do
like
that
to TP someone's home every once in a while. Like you picture you throwing eggs, or as a simple thing as that, like technically illegal, but it's like I just want to throw toilet paper at their house.
Yeah. Or like you get into like a real chaotic mood. I know when it's happened multiple times, and when I heard about it happening the most recent time, my reaction was just writing in all caps, kill him, and I followed it up for legal reasons. This is a joke, but like the frustration, just the fact that this person couldn't understand that he's doing a bad thing, and in our perspective was being very harmful. Made us want to be able to retaliate when we knew that if we retaliated, things would just get worse. Yeah. And mostly worse on our end, because that's how things like that work in the end.
Yeah,
right. You're talking about spells and that. Are there other aspects to witchcraft that, we might not be fully aware of? You mentioned tarot reading and divination. Yeah. Is there other things that you participate in that are different?
Yeah, there are a lot of things when it comes to how people do their witchcraft. Some people focus more on divination. Some just focus on spells or different kinds of spells. And there's a bunch of different things. Some people go more down a healing route versus just helping the environment route. So there's like types of witches, essentially, more who work with divination or astrology or blah, blah, blah. There's literally a witch for every sort of topic. There are a lot of things that are not technically witchcraft, but have been absorbed by the witchcraft community. The use of crystals, different forms of divination that different cultures have. So a lot of tarot, runes, things that we call oracle cards, the use of pendulums. These have been used for very long times, but haven't always fully been associated with what we call modern witchcraft. Witchcraft is very modern because people like to say the things we do are ancient. It's very spotty because witchcraft was underground and hidden, and people were persecuted for so long. We are having to rediscover, redefine, and recreate witchcraft over the past 75 years since it has become legal to technically practice, or at least be open about it.
Yeah.
So the things we do, some of the things are kind of old when we find old manuscripts, or the idea of old folklore from like a lot of traditions in England or Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, which all have very different cultures, but they still have their own histories. Like in the UK, there's a lot of talk with the Fae in different cultures and everything. So there's different things we are pulling, trying to put the pieces back together. But we are also adding other things to it, like I use Reiki, which is a more modern Japanese healing technique. Even though the system wasn't named and established till 100 years ago,
Yeah.
it just wasn't defined prior to then. Tarot has been used at least for the past since maybe 1500s, and then has evolved into what it is today. The use of crystals. There have been cultures using crystals since the beginning of time. The associations with different metals and rocks and stuff have always been used in spirituality and religion, especially in non-Christian cultures and traditions. And the use of different herbs and herbalism, which really pulls into, because if you get into herbalism, you can just grow essentially your own herbs. But then when you learn about some herbs are good for different things for health, but also those metaphysical associations, you just pulled in gardening into witchcraft. So there's so many ways you can pull I'm going to call them non-traditional spiritualism or acts that can accent and make whoever's form of witchcraft something completely new and different and really cool.
Yeah, has there been like really interesting developments recently in witchcraft?
I don't know how recent they are because I don't know the dates on when they really started getting pulled into it. But I'm gonna talk about things that pop up on TikTok more recently. I don't know how much prior to it is, but a lot of buzzwords that are very big on what we call witch talk. It's that sub-community on TikTok. Shadow work is a buzzword. And what we mean by shadow work, it's working on your inner demons, essentially. It's like, I don't want to call it therapy, because if you need therapy, you don't just want to do what we call shadow work. You still also need to go to therapy. But you can attach it to what we call shadow work, and it's forcing yourself to analyze who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And using that technique, or whatever technique of shadow work, you can journal, you can just talk to people, you can record yourself, listen back, whatever you want to do. If you are with a therapist and agree that it is something healthy for you, or if you should do it alone or with someone else, that is something that's been big, at least in the last few years. The buzzword's been big. And that is a way to just help grow yourself. Because in any community, people will use witchcraft or just any cool thing as a fad. For a lot of people, witchcraft is a fad right now. But those who don't stick with it, it'll just dwindle away. And that doesn't matter. But a big part about what witchcraft is the idea of using it to grow. You don't want to be stagnant. You're always going to want to grow. You always want to learn something new, no matter how small it is. You want to use the shadow work to grow yourself, and the more you grow and accept yourself and help work through things that anger you and figure out why you get triggered, and because maybe it's not something that necessarily needs therapy, but you notice things are just really bothering you and you don't know why. And then when you find the root causes for a lot of these, I just say issues that you have, or just angers toward things you haven't let go, or someone pissed you off and you've been angry, but you don't really know why. So using that time to dig in and just work on yourself, that's a really big thing. And I think it's always been a part of it, but the terms that we use for things change, actually. And as cultures change, the way we perceive and do things also change. And a big thing recently that also has been evolving with witchcraft has been, and it has very much been influenced by modern culture and the idea of what I said earlier of, I'm blanking on the word, cultural appropriation. There we go.
Yeah.
Because so many different cultures came together and essentially turned into what we now view as witchcraft. Words that people used to find as okay, we are evolving the language within witchcraft actually pretty quickly, thanks to social media. And the idea of, say, the use of sage. Sage in Palo Santo, in a lot of Native American traditions, is sacred. And there's different debates on, it's endangered, no, it's not endangered, blah, blah, blah. But one thing that is a big thing that people are trying to push past and develop and turn into a new thing that more people do is not use the word smudge. Because the act of smudging is very particular to certain Native American traditions that is very particular to their culture. But say when me as a Caucasian American Witch, I have no association with that culture. But the idea of like banning a complete herb and burning something that is legal and saying I can't use it is a little crazy. But the idea of me using a term incorrectly is more of the issue, at least that I have, and people I've talked to who are a part of those communities. Correcting old terminology that is old. Another example is the word gypsy.
So, like, what is wrong with the word gypsy?
So, because the term gypsy, apparently, I'm saying apparently, because I don't know too much about it, and I'm not a part of that culture, and because it's not something that offends me, I only have so much understanding of it, to people who are considered descendants of European travelers, the Romani groups of people that do exist throughout Europe and the United States, the term gypsy was supposed to have originated as a slur.
Yeah.
But then people forgot about that. And then it just became a word that became cute and associated with spiritualism. But the people who it actually is offensive to are like, hey guys, can we not use that anymore? Like, culturally now, as humans of the earth, we know a lot better now. And it kind of is like the idea of with the football team here in DC has having its name changed, the Redskins.
Yeah.
That same idea is like, just because it was accepted once, even if it was still offensive, but people didn't give a shit, we give a shit now. So we're really trying to clean out all the unnecessary scum, that things that no longer vibe with us, things that have needed to have been corrected, but people just are too lazy to change. And with more younger people coming into witchcraft and having more exposure to witchcraft is definitely going to change the culture very quickly. Because prior to, say, the last 20 years, most people who worked in witchcraft in the books that were being written were very old and very hard to find, and most of the people were over the age, I would say, on average in their 40s, 50s, and 60s once they became established. So, oh, excuse me. I just like burped. I had food at dinner before this. But that's been a big shift in witchcraft, is the age difference on what it used to be and how quickly it's changed. And that's because of social media and access to more content. So, yeah. So I would say how the younger generations are trying to evolve it at a quicker rate to be more accessible to more people, but also to remove things that were created under possibly racist habits that Western culture had for a really long time.
Yeah.
And we have all seen that across the world in not just witchcraft aspects. So witches are also actively working on it in their own community, making it welcome to those who are part of the LGBTQ or are people of color or from indigenous groups and everything. We want to make them feel welcome, especially if we're using traditions that were originally theirs. But it's been so long, it is already ingrained into our culture as well.
Yeah, you like that point is very important. Where here in Australia we used to have a very large Indigenous population before European settlement, and there's been a lot of discussion over the last 10 years about making sure we respect Indigenous cultures, making sure we're using the right terminology, and giving a space for them to be able to live their lives as close to the way they lived it before, with the added benefits of things like healthcare and bits and pieces. So it's been very interesting, and one of the things that scientists are definitely doing here in Australia is looking at Aboriginal practices, things like backburning and bits and pieces that they did, and realizing that they're really important for the ecosystem here in Australia, because that is actually the proper way to manage Australia's ecosystem rather than a European or an American way of looking at our ecosystems, which is fascinating. Out of curiosity, have there been people who have been like resistant to the changes that have been made in the witching community?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's from people of all ages though. A lot of people, and the problem is people are uncomfortable to change. When they know something, they want to stick with it, and they don't want to go past it. It's like, oh, this is what I've been taught. I can't deviate from it. Like, I don't want to learn, or, oh, I've just been using it for so long. It's like the old grandfather who uses racist words around people, and you're like, you can't say that anymore. He's like, oh, I've been saying this for 75 years. I don't give a shit. I'm going to say whatever the fuck I want. I don't care about the repercussions that it has. A lot of people do think that way, and we're trying to get, at least people who align with my beliefs in that, we're trying to work through that. And the problem is there are people that just won't change because they are so set in their ways. And not everyone is all about the idea of also using witchcraft as self-growth. Some people just use witchcraft as a way to gain, but not grow.
Yeah.
So that depends on the person, and not everyone vibes with that either. But that's their choice. But it doesn't mean we have to accept them to make the environment harmful or less enjoyable for other people. So they are going to get backlash.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I was having a conversation with some friends of mine last night, and I'm a journalist, so, like, my journalism work often sits quite separate to the work that other people do and the other day jobs that people have, because people see news as something that they consume in their spare time, whereas I create it full time.
Yeah.
So, then, like, people's views on, like, news and certain issues and, like, news companies, they're like, oh, this company's biased this way and this company's biased this way. And I'm sitting here going, we can't make this assumption every time. Every time we have a conversation about this, it comes back to, these assumptions and, your unwillingness to let, things change and allow for things that were once rude and inconsiderate to become a little bit more considerate and a little bit better.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think that does affect this is a lot of the books and the sources that people find as more credible is the only reason they find them as more credible as new content or new authors that are within the community is they think just because a book is old that it's better or that it knows better or that that's the way you're supposed to do it. No, traditions change. Religions do change, even though people don't like to admit that. Religions do change. It's just at a slower rate. But a lot of good books that I do use terminology that we are moving away. We don't want to say smudging because that's Native American based, but many cultures use what we call smoke cleansing. It's very different. You're still burning herbs, but the intent behind it is vastly different. And the same thing with using the term gypsy. It was originally a slur, and the idea of just because it sounds cute and pretty and you want to willingly stay ignorant to the concept, we need to work on. But for a lot of, say, those who are older, they are very used to using certain books. And they're like, well, that's just how I've been taught. Or someone who's new to the community, they're like, well, I read this book and that's what it said. But then another book says that's wrong. What do I do? Well, you need to do some more research and see what people are actually saying. Because sometimes old facts, and I don't want to say witchcraft is essentially a fact, but old content can be out of date. It could still have good stuff, but it doesn't mean everything in it is still accurate.
Oh, and I don't think people realize that, there are, just like food, just like, other consumables, information becomes out of date at some point. It has an expiry date. I work in a radio station at the moment, and when we submit stories to go on air, we have to give an expiry date and go, this story expires on this date. So that if they want to rebroadcast that story at some stage, they know they've got to rebroadcast it before the expiry date. And I find it fascinating that people sometimes just don't understand that sometimes information is out of date and we've got to, rewrite the books a little bit.
But all the medical books out there that from 100 years ago are very different to what we actually use today. It doesn't mean we can't read and learn from those other books, but we can use those older books as a guide, but also teach us about the history of where we did come from.
Yeah, it's very interesting. My brother's studying a science degree at the moment, and my parents studied it 23 years ago at this point. And they still have their textbooks. So my brother grabbed them out of interest and he reads through them. He goes, this has changed like 5 times since this textbook was written. Yeah. All the science is very out of date. And it's, and I think as an adult, I think we start to learn, bringing back the adulting section, but like we start to learn where like things are out of date and knowing when we just need to go, stop. I now need to learn this one more time so that like it can be as correct as possible.
Yeah.
Pretend I don't know anything or something like that, which I think is so important. Some of the most valuable conversations I've ever had is when I've turned around to someone who assumes I know something and go, hey, can you just pretend I don't know anything? Because I don't want to make an assumption here. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, how does, the conversations you have among the witchcrafting community, fixing up those terms, making sure that people, are following things that are, a little bit more culturally appropriate. Does that transfer into your day-to-day life? Do you see that you're more conscious about making sure you're not using derogatory terms in your general life?
Yeah, because like the term gypsy before, a lot of people don't realize that people are now being open that the term is being associated as a slur. And once you kind of become aware, or if you actually care, some people don't care. Honestly, there are some just nasty people out there that don't give a shit. But as someone who wants to be fair to people and make sure that I'm not accidentally insulting them, I am open to making those changes and being aware of the words I use, because the words you say make a difference. And it's not just like, haha, like someone is making a joke that isn't offensive, but if you say something or you think of something and then it comes out wrong and you're like, ooh, that didn't sound right. You do need to be careful with the same thing when it comes to spirituality and how you interact with people, because people are very sensitive when it comes to certain things in their cultures and how they feel disrespected or respected with the terms that we use. And I definitely find myself being more aware with terms that are on the spiritual side of trying to be respectful to people and correct the language that I personally feel are wrong. Some people will fully use the word gypsy and not care. Some people will still very openly use the word smudge versus smoke cleansing. And they're like, well, I just don't care. And it's just like, well, I get that because it doesn't affect you. Yeah.
But it actually affects someone else. And, in a society that is so connected today, we've got to understand that we might say something and go, this doesn't actually mean anything. I don't mean harm by it. But you actually do harm people.
Yeah, and you just because you are on the outside of that doesn't mean it's not harming people. Like, if you use something and you're like, I'm not going to break into someone's home if it's a listener that listens to my podcast and they say the word smudge instead of smoke cleansing because I told them to say the word smoke cleansing instead. If they use it in the privacy of their home, that is for them to do. But when it comes to working with the community and around other people, you do need to be a little more conscious about those things.
Yeah, and I think, the main takeaway I've gotten, other than learning, the basics about witchcraft, is that the main takeaway I've gotten here is that, we can be a lot more sensitive and still, do the things we love. We don't have to wreck them. We just got to change our mentality slightly.
Yeah, and learn the history. I actually have an episode coming out tomorrow about Reiki. I've already have an episode on Reiki, but I'm adding information that I've personally learned in the past year, and my opinions on things have changed because I've been exposed to new information. And one of the ideas is because Reiki is from Japan, traditionally, people are actively talking about the whitewashedness of how we practice Reiki here in the United States. So that is something that is now being pushed a little bit more to, even if you still practice the way you have always practiced, you should maybe at least learn more of the history and the roots of Japanese culture, the inspiration of Reiki, that it is attached to an influence of Buddhism, Taoism, and Shinto. So maybe if you at least, you don't have to practice those traditions, but at least have a knowledge of those traditions, you will probably have some sort of gain from your Reiki practice, but also you will give the people who have the Reiki treatments, they will probably have a better experience because you understand why Reiki is the way it is. You can do something, but if you don't understand why it works, you don't have a full understanding of what you're actually doing.
Yes, I think that is important, especially nowadays when there are people who know exactly what they're doing and are experts in that particular field. As we say in journalism, there is always an expert that is willing to talk. You've just got to find the right person.
Yeah.
On that note, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Fawna. Has there been any media that you've been consuming, books, movies, TV shows that you want to share?
Book-wise, I purchased a couple Witchcraft books the other day for those who are interested in witchcraft. There are 2 books by Thorin Mooney. She is a Gardenarian high priestess. She has 2 books, so go ahead and look at those. I'm blanking on the titles because I've bought so many books recently, but look into that author, Thorin Mooney. And also, I got a book from called Drawing Down the Moon. So if you're interested in the moon and the feminine side of witchcraft, look into Drawing Down the Moon. It is a classic book that I haven't read yet. And then there's one other book that I have, and it is about the horned god within witchcraft and Wicca and the associations of other cultures that have had gods with horns, essentially. And that is by Jason Mankey. So if any of you guys are interested in those, I'm sorry I can't remember the full titles off the top of my head, but those are the authors and the other book that I am currently reading.
Yeah. And where can people find you on the internet?
On the internet, you could find me on my podcast at Cat's Tea and Witchcraft. You could follow me on social media on Instagram at Cat's Tea and Witchcraft, on Twitter at Cat's Tea and Witch. And if anyone ever has any questions or wants some of these links and might be having trouble finding them on social media, you can send me an email at catsteaandwitchcraftpodcast@gmail.com.
Awesome. For me, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at sam.the.journalist, and you can find me on Twitter at samobjournalist. This week I am going to plug... wow. I've used up all my plugs. I've recorded an episode yesterday that was a little bit delayed, and I've just gone completely blanked. Luckily, I have a list. I'm going to plug the movie Luca.
Okay.
I know it's been a while since it's come out, but I just loved it. It was just like a nice,
cute.
like, childish foray into, like, you know, the fun mythology that... mythology? I'm not sure whether it's based in reality at all, but it's a fun story about young kids, which I think is more and more important. I think understanding the complex world that young kids live in today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm definitely...
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
I definitely think we're going to have you on for another one to explain further. There was so much to talk about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No problem. I'd love to.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to Content and Capable. You can follow the podcast socials at Content, the letter N, Capable, on Instagram and Twitter. You can send a super boring email to us through contentandcapablepod@gmail.com. The art was done by Opia. You can follow them on Opia_art on Instagram. Opia is spelled O-P-I-A. Feel free to message them about making art for your project. Our music was written, recorded, and edited by Nora Strauss-Riggs. You can find Nora at Kane_I, that's I as in the body part, on Instagram and Twitter. Feel free to message her about making music for your project or editing your podcast. I'm proud to be a part of the Movie Night Crew Network, which features the Restricted section, a chapter-by-chapter Harry Potter pod with lots of spoilers all the time, the Movie Night Crew, join some friends as they react to some terrible, some meh, and some really great movies. Fandoms Gone Wrong, a show that discusses all things fandoms, Of the Eldest Gods, a chapter-by-chapter Rick Riordan pod full of myths and legends, and My Cabbages, an Avatar podcast that follows the true hero of Avatar The Last Airbender, the Cabbage Cart Guy.
Coffee, tea, honor, cabbage. Long ago, the 4 elements lived in harmony. Then, shit went totally cray when the Avatar attacked. Only the Cabbage Man, merchant of fine cruciferous vegetables, could stand against his trolling. But when the world needed some dank veg, he vanished. 10 years have passed, and my partner and I have started a new podcast.
My Cabbages! An Avatar podcast.
A weekly show about Avatar The Last Airbender. Whether it's Sokka's new line of cologne...
Hey, look at you, sitting there on a seal. Well, now look back at me. I'm on an even bigger seal. Now look away.
D&D related antics.
You have to make an acrobatics check for that. And Aang just like unzips his pants and whips out his D20s. He's just like, I got this.
Or randomly breaking into song.
Go bending waterfall.
We'll stumble our way through the greatest show ever made, one episode at a time.
You can reach us at CabbageCast, which is our Twitter, or
Subscribe wherever you catch pod.
Rotten cabbages? What kind of slum do you think this is?
Content and Capable is a podcast all about answering the question, how do you adult? Don't forget to rate and review it on your favourite podcatcher, and I will see you next Monday for another episode.
That movie sucked. I kind of liked it.
Movie Night Crew Network.